Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Blue Dog Whisperer in a couple months. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've done an episode, but we are here and we have a very special guest. He's been on a couple of previous episodes. Give it up for John Hensel of Washington. Whoop, whoop.
Hey, Evan.
Hey, John. Good to see ya.
Yep.
It's been a while since I've done an episode, so thank you for joining me for this episode. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty swell. Just driving paratransit buses, full time, and then trying to keep the house in order and clean during the weekend. It's been crazy.
I know. It's been hectic on my end, too, actually, so...
We try to have a little fun and do some podcasting when we can, right?
Absolutely, yes. So, since the last episode, which with you and Brian Hensel, where we discussed all sorts of things, a lot has happened, and I feel that over the last couple months with President Biden's administration, that he has sort of really peeved both the extreme progressive left and the Trump cultist right. And I want to discuss basically what America would look like if either extreme had their way. So we know that progressive Democrats and Trumpian Republicans, as much as they hate each other, they have almost an equally sickening utopian vision, or their own version of utopia. Am I right?
Yep. Their own version of collectivism.
Yeah. And as blue dogs and as moderates, we try to fight extremism wherever we may see it. And I think that's very important that we do that as blue dogs. And unfortunately, because we do call out BS from both sides, it causes us to almost get punched from both sides. In fact, actually, it's not almost. It does happen. That's what That's generally what happens. Would you agree with that, John?
I would completely agree. I'm on a couple of different political chat groups. My favorite one is Total Politics. Now, they've redone it so many times, it's Total Politics Forever.
Mm.
And there's just a vast array of different types of political groups and ideologies within that group. But it's funny, I get called a fascist from the left wing, and I get called a communist by the right wing on that group.
I've never heard of someone who is both a communist and a fascist, but it just goes to show you how hyperbole is such a big factor when you have these extremists.
Yep, for sure.
In fact, I think a lot of Bernie bots would not be at all upset at the idea of being called communists, and I think a lot of these these far-right Trumpies wouldn't be afraid of being called fascists, some of them maybe.
Well, they want to just hide it as direct fascism, but it's kind of like tongue-in-cheek fascism.
I think for some Trumpies it is.
It's like, I don't believe in complete genocide,
Yeah, that's fascinating. We belong to a conservative Democratic page on Facebook, and and this is something I want to discuss a little bit because I think that it plays into both of the extremes. But we were discussing anti-Semitism, and unfortunately, in this conservative Democratic page, you do have some people who I feel are libertarians. Would you agree with that?
Oh, you mean in the moderate spectrum?
I don't remember what the name of the page was, but one of these pages, it's basically the conservative Democratic group. I don't know if you wanted to advertise it on our page.
You don't have to, but I know which one you're talking about. It was like the first conservative Democrat group.
It's basically, you got a lot of libertarians there, and they actually don't like real blue dogs. But the topic of anti-Semitism came up, and libertarians like Ron Paul do, a lot of them do exhibit anti-Jewish tendencies, but the far right and the far left both have their own non-favorable opinions of Jewish issues or Jews in general. As far as the progressive left, they want to end aid to Israel, and many want to end Israel in general, whereas the Trumpy right are all for nationalism in a lot of ways, and a lot of them are kind of, some of them are actual Nazis, and some of them tolerate Jews, and some of them like Jews, but they don't understand Jewish issues. And some of them are Jewish themselves, actually.
Yeah. I feel like the Republican right is definitely kind of turning into two parties right now. You got the extreme far right that are probably the closest actual thing to fascists.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like kind of a, establishment centrist, like Republican right, like Liz Cheney.
Well,
what's that one senator from Maine? What's her name?
Susan Collins.
Huh?
Susan Collins?
Oh, yeah, Susan Collins. And, I mean, you can see that there's definitely two different sides to the Republican Party.
Well,
and,
yes. And the thing is...
more and more as time goes on, so...
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is... Regarding that Cheney... I'm sorry to interrupt. Regarding that Cheney versus Collins comparison... I would say Cheney is much more conservative than Collins, but they're not like the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party. For instance, in 2020, Collins did not endorse Trump, but Cheney did.
Yeah. I would say that Liz Cheney's probably closer to traditionalist conservatives like George Bush Jr. Mm-hmm. Who's another good example? Like...
maybe her father, Dick Cheney, in some ways.
Yeah, Dick Cheney.
I mean, her father was his VP, so...
Yeah. Paul Ryan. Those are like your typical run-of-the-mill establishment conservatives. They're pretty... I'd say they're right in the middle of the right-wing spectrum.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And then Senator Collins is more like a centrist Republican, right on the other side of Blue Dog, kind of a left Republican.
Murkowski, too. But what I would say is that you do have a lot of... Paul Ryan, I would say, is an establishment conservative, but he's also very, very extreme. I think Ryan... I don't think he himself is evil, but I think Paul Ryan has a pretty evil ideology, which I believe he's sincere about, where there's absolutely, where everyone is left to fend for themselves. I've noticed that that's kind of consistent with Paul Ryan's ideology. I think that there was an ad back in 2012 that said, that had Paul Ryan pushing an old lady off of a cliff.
A true GOP platform conservative believes in corporatization of everything and everything being privatized.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning no public health care, no public services. If you want service, you basically have to have the money to front the bill.
Yep. And
which, to me, that's pretty greedy, and it's almost anti-democratic.
I agree with you. And I think one of the problems is that because we are seeing this extremism rising up in both parties, we almost view people like Paul Ryan and people like... I don't even know. Elizabeth Warren, we view them more favorably because they're not totally crazy. Yet Paul Ryan and Elizabeth Warren are nowhere near being close to centrist, and yet they represent some very weird... They believe some very weird things. So I remember when George W. Bush was hated so much. I'm not saying that George W. Bush is with Paul Ryan. I think George W. Bush is maybe a little to the left of Ryan, but I've noticed that Democrats speak very favorably about George W. Bush now when, some of them still call him a war criminal, but a lot of them called him a war criminal before and said he had blood on his hands. And then the Trump years came along and they were like, oh my God, I love George W. Bush. It's like they had amnesia about what happened during those 8 years.
Yeah, I think people quickly forget. And they just look at the past with rose-colored glasses when your government gets incrementally worse.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had Trump, which is kind of like a total political disaster for the GOP, and it makes Democrats look at old war hawk Republicans that totally put our economy in financial ruin. Makes them look like good guys comparatively.
And that scares me a little bit. And that's one of the things that I can actually go with some on the progressive left about. Just because Donald Trump was really bad doesn't mean George W. Bush was a saint. George W. Bush was far from a saint.
No. I would say he was still one of the worst presidents of the early 21st century.
Yeah, I think, since the 21st century began, we've had four presidents: Clinton, Bush, Obama. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We've had five presidents: Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden. And I think that Trump is the worst, and Bush is second.
Yeah, I could easily second that.
As far as Democrats, it's a little early to talk about President Biden for me, but I think Clinton was definitely better than President Obama.
You know what? I kind of look at Obama and Clinton's policies as being kind of similar in a way. And I don't know. I've never totally been repulsed by anything Obama did, and I've never been totally repulsed by anything that Clinton did. I'm starting to get a little bit disappointed with some of Biden's policies, but not all of them completely. I think he has gone in the right direction when it comes to working on infrastructure and also trying to create jobs back at home and trying to give corporations incentives to stay in this country for creating manufacturing jobs. So he's in the right populist direction there, but I still think he's trying so hard to cater to progressive PR right now that my view of Biden's getting a little tainted. It doesn't mean I don't have faith in him still, but I feel like I don't know. He's just seeming like he's drifting further left than I thought he would, and to me, Obama almost seems like a staunch conservative compared to Biden.
Which is interesting because I don't entirely disagree with you. I think President Biden has been appealing to the far left to some degree, and what's interesting is that they still don't like him, a lot of them. But what I would say is that a lot of people at this stage of the Biden presidency, a lot of people view President Biden as being more moderate than a lot of people viewed President Obama as being a moderate at this stage of his presidency. And I think one of the reasons why is because of how they campaigned. Biden campaigned as a centrist, Obama campaigned as a progressive, and I almost feel like that they have abandoned both of them to some degree, abandoned the platforms and the place on the political spectrum where they ran, and almost met in the liberal center of the left side of the political spectrum.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I think Obama, you could classify him as a pragmatic progressive. I would even classify him as a liberal. President Biden, I think, has always been. Everyone said during the primary, "Oh, President Biden is a centrist," and I was like, "No, he's not. President Biden is a liberal." President Biden. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I just had this. I had this hope that he would be a conservative Democrat, and it hasn't come to fruition.
Well, I never thought he was a conservative Democrat, especially when you look at some of what he did. What I do like about President Biden is that I think the reason he seemed like a conservative Democrat is because his positions that he held as a senator were very much like the Blue Dogs of today. They weren't like the Blue Dogs of the 90s. They were like the Blue Dogs of today. But back then, his politics were considered more liberal than anything else. But because liberalism, the difference between liberalism and progressivism, in my view, is that liberalism seems to have a sense of fairness, and it's like, we care about you, but you also have to care about yourself. Whereas progressives are like, I have to help you even if you don't want to help yourself, and I don't subscribe to that progressive mindset. I think that people need the help they can get if they're willing to help themselves.
It seems like progressives are really big fans of the Big Brother nanny state looking after them.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's certain rules that are enforced and you better just obey because it's for your own goodwill. It's like whatever happened to free speech, whatever happened to all these rights on the Bill of Rights that gave everybody equal and fair expression.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Liberals back in the 1960s were the ones fighting for free speech. And what's interesting is that there are a lot of liberals, who are my father's age. My father, was a teenager in the 60s and 70s, and he had, I would say he's a traditional liberal. I think that he is like a Bill Maher liberal. I think that I would call him a patriotic person. I would say that he hates political correctness and believes in free speech and all that. And that's not what the progressive left is today. And to some degree, they're trying to. I still think that traditional liberalism is a very respectful ideology, and by the way, I think traditional conservatism to a large degree is a respectful ideology too.
Yeah, at its roots or some of its original platforms, it's just it seems like the parties have gone astray from what their ideal foundations were, and it's getting kind of scary because it's just showing that a traditional liberal nowadays seems like a far right person compared to what the progressive ideology is today. The progressive ideology today is almost like an anti-American, anti-patriotic stance that almost favors globalism over taking care of Americans first on jobs or worrying about American grassroots problems. It's more like they would rather create this globalist policy that polices the rest of the world and makes everybody kind of fall in line with the same type of one world policies. Like, I think a progressive's dream come true is if we just amalgamated with the EU and became as one. That's what it seems like to me, and I don't like that. I like the idea of America being an independent nation that's self-sustaining, creates good middle-class jobs for at least a good portion, at least a good 40% of Americans, and provides, affordable health care. But, we should be working towards sustaining ourselves, not trying to save the whole world and trying to bring the rest of the world's politics into our political world,
I remember when the term liberal was used as an insult by those in the Republican Party. Now it's also used as an insult by the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
Would it be fair, kind of with the point I was just bringing up a little bit ago, would it be fair to call progressives globalists? I look at them as basically, they're just left-wing globalists, is all they are, really.
I mean, the thing is, this globalist versus nationalist debate, it's interesting because I view both. I mean, I don't know much about globalism, but I do know that nationalism, at one time, nationalism was not considered a really terrible word, but you got to be careful now with nationalism, because a lot of times it's not about country, it's about race.
Well, Trump admitted that he's a proud nationalist, he said, and you could see with a lot of his rhetoric where he was getting at.
Yes.
I mean, there's two different types. I kind of believe in slight nationalism in a way, but not in the way probably that Donald Trump would think of. Right,
I get that.
Like, I just think that having secure borders is important. I think that, in a way, we should, be proud of our own culture and sing, say the Pledge of Allegiance, and
right,
put your hand over your heart during the national anthem. All that. I'm kind of a proud nationalist in that sense. Right. I think we should be able to have our own culture we can be proud of, but not to the extent of. Kind of creating only one proper race, or just getting to where everybody has to agree the same way, or otherwise you're going to be attacked somehow, either, politically or, once you get to that, what's the word, homogenous view of nationalism, that can be scary. And when I mean homogenous, that means one way of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you, John. And actually, it's funny because I think that a lot of people believe everything that you believe in, and I'm one of them. Yet there are progressives who think that if you believe those things, that must make you ethnocentric. Well, here's the thing: I believe the United States of America is the best country in the world, but I think we do have our problems, and I think that other countries do certain things better than we do, but overall, I think we are the best.
Yep, I would agree there. I think there's a reason that so many people try so hard to immigrate here. Even though the communists would constantly argue that this is the worst place in the world, and we have no human rights ethics. I've heard a lot of communists say this when I debate them online, because I joined communist groups just to debate communists, and they look at us as pretty much the most evil place in the world, where we're cracking whips on all kinds of indigenous people across the world, and we don't believe in human rights. It's like, if that was the case, people would be running from their lives and trying to escape America, but you see hordes of people trying to immigrate here. So I don't think we're quite as cruel and evil as communists make us out to be.
Well, I will tell you this. I saw a meme from a couple of conservatives that I follow on Facebook, who I don't always agree with, and often I don't, but it was a photo of people from south of the border, and it had a border wall, so that's how you knew. And it said, "Let us in, we want to be victims of systemic racism." Not saying systemic racism doesn't exist, but if it's so bad here, why do we have so many people trying to come here that would be, subjected to this this kind of this marginalization?
Yeah, it's what's the word I'm trying to use? It's a red herring.
Mm-hmm.
Where basically they're trying to prove a point that doesn't exist to get their political agenda to sway the way that they would prefer it to sway.
Yeah.
Which is, once again, globalization. Why else would you be in such a hurry to import such a large mass of people in such a short amount of time, unless you're trying to create a globalistic government that does police people across the globe, So that's what I think, in a way, progressives are nationalists too, just in a more globalist aspect, while
they're kind of rooting against us.
Yeah. They want to be able to police the whole world, as progressives, but I think, far right-wingers just want to be able to kind of make us go back to an independent nation that's totally privatized and self-reliant, but that might be a pipe dream that's not so obtainable either, the way that they're going about it, because they still are basically giving the corporations unlimited power, which always creates globalization. It doesn't create nationalism when you give corporations unlimited power.
So I want to do something with you before we discuss the extremists. Because I think that it's important for Blue Dogs are not monolithic either, but I want to get your perspectives. I'm going to say the names of some Democrats first, and then some Republicans, and I want you to tell me in a sentence what you think of them or how you characterize them, or anything like that.
Okay.
So first off, Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders is an old socialist with a new brand label of socialism that gets the young hipsters to want to try his lima beans. I think, maybe, at one time Bernie was kind of a hipster or a radical himself, back in the 50s and early 60s. He did go to protests and get arrested. So I guess he has kind of walked the walk when it comes to communists and socialists, and that's why they respect him. But I think that Bernie Sanders has kind of created a double standard, or pretended that he's all about these certain beliefs and stuff and standpoints, but really he has compromised quite a bit, even on his far left stances in the last, especially in the last election.
I think that's interesting you say that. One thing I agree with you that to some degree, because I remember he said in an interview that open borders was a Koch brothers proposal, and then 4 years later he was talking about he said that he wanted to end deportations, all deportations. That seems like a total switch.
Yeah, it shows you that he's getting on board with globalism, and he doesn't care about grassroots socialism anymore.
Bernie 2016 was such a different character from Bernie 2020 in some ways. Everyone says Bernie has always been consistent. First of all, consistency is not always a good thing. But secondly, I'm not so sure how consistent Bernie has been.
No, he's becoming a globalist that's on board with helping corporations, it seems like. I'm almost in favor of grassroots socialism in its purest form. Like, I like a little bit of that to, help your brother out and make sure that they have good benefits, and that they can afford their housing. In some ways, I can almost agree with Bernie at times when it comes to taking care of your fellow neighbor within the country. But all of a sudden now he's kind of abandoned that stance of taking care of us American citizens first, and he's gotten on a globalist perspective just because the progressive wing told him to. So it shows you there's some people behind the scenes controlling actors within the progressive wing of the Democratic Party.
How would you grade him overall? I mean, based on him in general.
Oh, Bernie?
Yeah.
Reagan?
Yeah. Letter grade.
I mean, in 2016, I was going to vote for Bernie Sanders. I actually liked him, but I would say at this point in time, after seeing how much he switched and just generally him being on board with the squad, I would give him like a 4 at this point. Not very favorable.
So,
I mean, like,
what about?
I think he's a good speaker, but that's about it.
What about? So what would your letter grade be for him?
Like a D.
Okay, I give him an F.
Pretty much, I'm not too favorable of him. I would just only put maybe some of the women from the squad at a worse level than him, but he's not too favorable in my beliefs.
Joe Manchin.
Joe Manchin, he's one of those guys you kind of like and you kind of hate at the same time. I like his independentness and his ability to be a maverick and not be defined by the Democrat Party, who seems like the Democrat Party has become homogenized to the point that nobody can be an individual anymore. Mm-hmm. So I do respect that he's like a true like lone wolf maverick, but at times he seems like he's trying too hard to suck up to the GOP, and he almost gets in the way of any progress among Democrats. So I would say, like, I kind of like him to be there as a buffer against extremism, because he kind of does buffer against the far right and the far left, but in some ways he is not the most effective at helping getting bills passed. And so I'd give him, like, he's at a better rating for me than Bernie Sanders, but he's still like maybe like a 5 or a 6 to me. So
what letter grade would you give him?
I would give him like a solid C. He's not really great. He's not really horrible either.
Okay, I gave him an A-. What about AOC?
She definitely gets an F.
I agree with you there. I gave her an F-.
Yeah, I think her, Ilhan Omar. How do you say the other gal's name? Tlaib Rashad?
Rashida Tlaib.
Oh, Rashida Tlaib. Like, I would give her an F as well. Pretty much the whole squad should be voted out of office.
Yeah. Kyrsten Sinema.
Kyrsten Sinema, I actually, everything I've heard and seen from her, she seems like maybe economically she's a little socialist, but I think culturally she's a moderate. So I actually like that. That's kind of my viewpoint and stance is kind of that I'm somewhat economically left or almost like borderline social dim, but culturally I'm more of a moderate or even slightly conservative. So I kind of I almost align my beliefs similar to hers. I would give her a decent rating as a Democrat. Probably, I'd say at least, I don't know her enough because I don't live in Arizona, but everything I've heard from her, I'd give her a B+ for sure for her ability to be able to reach across the aisle and create bills that are in good faith to the general public's needs.
Yeah, I give her an A+ because she's my favorite senator. It doesn't hurt that she's cute too. So
there you go.
Next one. Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren is I think she has some great grassroots ideas on bringing jobs back in manufacturing. Like, there's some things she said that were almost American-centric, like pro-America first at times. But then she gets deeply into this identity politics ideology, mm-hmm. and saying that pretty much whites that are just trying to run a successful business are pretty much apartheid racists, or I don't know. She gets way too much into the identity politics and kind of that corporate progressivism where she's still taking huge amounts of money from corporate sponsors, and those corporate sponsors are probably doing corrupt bad things, but she acts like she's holier than thou. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of Elizabeth Warren. I'd kind of put her in the Bernie Sanders spectrum, where not everything she says is absolutely horrible, like the Squad, but she's definitely not a great candidate. I'd put her at a D.
I gave her a D+.
Yep, so we're about the same idea of where she sits.
Andrew Cuomo.
Andrew Cuomo is kind of a traditional liberal, and I think a lot of his policies weren't like really that far extreme. I think he's like somewhere almost like near where Biden is. The scandal kind of makes him look a lot worse nowadays, but if you put the scandal aside and just looked at like what he's done and everything, he's not really a bad, he's not a bad governor. He's, I would say that he's decent. He's maybe not like a poster boy of what I would see as like the perfect leader, but I would give him probably somewhere around a B-.
I gave him a D.
A D?
Yeah, and I gave him a D because he did terrible bail reform in New York, which with de Blasio, which has basically been a disaster. And in that sense, he's
on certain bills. That's true.
Yeah,
and de Blasio is a horrible.
I just feel like the Cuomo. What?
I just said de Blasio is a horrible failure of a mayor.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that.
I mean, I put her on the worst list of worst mayors, along with Lori Lightfoot.
Did you heard about what Lightfoot did recently, right?
I don't know. Pretty much everything she does is horrible. She pretty much rewards criminals on a daily basis and pretty much tries to oppress tax-paying blue-collar workers.
Well,
in my opinion.
Lightfoot basically said at a press conference that she was only going to take questions from black and brown reporters.
I mean, I get that she's like, she's black and a lesbian, so she matches all the minority, groups there. Right. But I feel like it doesn't matter what race or orientation you are, that's still very racist.
Yeah. Fighting discrimination with discrimination.
Yeah, I mean, being not racist is trying to be for equality for all the groups, not, black's better than everybody or whatever. It's just, I didn't like that at all, really. And, Lori, I'd say like Lori Lightfoot and Bill de Blasio are probably the worst mayors that ever existed.
Lori Lightfoot also got she shut down all the salons in Chicago, and then she got her hair done while other people couldn't get their hair done.
Almost sounds like Gavin Newsom, right?
Yeah, her hair looked excellent.
Gavin Newsom in California put some of the strictest lockdowns for everybody and for all businesses. It made a lot of businesses go bankrupt and made a lot of people where they couldn't even go out and get essential items and need or essential services. But yet he was at wine parties without a mask on.
Nancy Pelosi did the same thing with the haircut thing. I don't know. A lot of liberals are do as I say, not as I do, and it comes off as entitled.
It kind of does. And that's what I'd like to see go away within the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. If you're going to create these strict standards for everybody at least follow them yourself,
Right. Andrew Yang.
I actually am a big fan of Yang, actually. I think the two top guys I was rooting for was either Biden or Buttigieg, given that we didn't have a lot of great moderate candidates this time around, and most of them were progressives. But I think Yang didn't play identity politics at all. He focused mostly on economics and just finding ways to get American families to where they can stay afloat, and how he could advance education and technology
Right.
I think if he's gonna, I don't really know exactly where he stands economically. I think he's kind of a traditional liberal in a sense, but I really like Yang not getting into the political ideology. I mean, like the political identity politics. He just stuck just to grassroots problems and trying to solve them, and pointing out all the failures of the Republican Party. So I kind of liked Andrew Yang's campaign run. I just don't think he had a chance this time around.
Well, Andrew Yang's running for mayor of New York City now, and I actually canvassed for him up in Queens. I traveled a while to get there, and I canvassed for him. And I didn't get to talk to a lot of people. Most people didn't answer the door, but I like Andrew Yang. I think he'd make a very good mayor of New York. I think he'd be a lot better than Bill de Blasio, but that's a very, very low bar.
Yeah, Andrew Yang is he's not bad. I think he's pretty center left, but he's not extreme in any way.
It also seems like a good drinking buddy.
I'd give him a solid B for sure.
I gave him a B plus.
Yep.
Joe Kennedy.
Joe Kennedy. He's like one of those guys that he makes really good points at times, and at times he almost seems like a moderate, but then every now and then he jumps on the progressive bandwagon, and then all of a sudden he plays a little bit of identity politics, but not as bad as some. I think overall, though, he's pragmatic and taking care of certain basic needs that the community needs when it comes to infrastructure and jobs and healthcare benefits. I think he's kind of center left as well, but he's a good practical candidate. I don't think he's going to do anything too crazy or anything that would just be like, what did he do now? Like, I think I'd worry about that with Joe Kennedy. I think he's somebody that's worth voting for, at least if there's not a better Blue Dog in place, But yeah, I'd give him like a C plus.
I gave him an A minus. I think Joe Kennedy, for Massachusetts, by Massachusetts standards, Massachusetts is I've got my Massachusetts Democrat shirt on. Massachusetts Democrats are very, very progressive, a lot of them. So I think Joe Kennedy is kind of a moderate by Massachusetts Democratic standards.
Yeah.
And I worked on his campaign for Senate remotely against Ed Markey, and I was very, very disappointed that he didn't win.
I know, that was sad.
Yeah.
You think he just was jumping up from Congress to Senate too quick?
I think the problem is that a lot of people really liked Ed Markey because Ed Markey, I don't know, he just has this appeal for people my age with the young voters because he's close to being a Bernie bot. Not exactly. Ed Markey actually likes Israel to some degree, whereas Bernie doesn't.
That's different.
But Ed Markey, he's very, very progressive. He worked with AOC, and I think that generated enthusiasm among my age demographic. And most people. I mean, if you look at the map, the primary map for Massachusetts between Markey and Kennedy, Amherst, Massachusetts, which is where UMass is, very hippy dippy college town. Markey literally beat Kennedy by over 30 or 40 points in that college town. That's how much the young people and the progressives favor Markey. So that's why I really like Kennedy.
Yeah. It sounds like that region's kind of a not far left, but just left centric area where if you have more progressive talking points or kind of like I'm going to help solve the poverty problem in my area, you're going to get more votes than the person that's just a platform dim.
Well, the problem, Massachusetts is a very interesting state because, number one, they elect a lot of Republican governors. But what I would say is that Massachusetts is politically not diverse, but the conservative areas are the areas that tend to be a little more moderate. Basically, the Kennedy areas, the places that voted for Kennedy, were parts of southeastern Massachusetts by New Bedford, which is kind of by Rhode Island. That's more of a conservative area, kind of industrial, I think. And then southwestern Massachusetts and some parts by like Longmeadow and Springfield were kind of more Kennedy's area. Markey did very well in northwestern Massachusetts and the Boston area. And Kennedy did
closer to New York.
Right? Boston's nowhere near New York.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to
Boston is
think.
Boston is 5 hours from
See,
New
the
York.
East Coast is foreign to me. I kind of know the layout, but state to state, I'm not like perfect on it.
You're,
But
you're from the West Coast, so I forgive you. No,
there's a lot of little teeny states over there.
yeah, no. Massachusetts is over 100 miles from New York City. At the very least, Boston is almost 200 miles from New York City. But
I guess. Oh wait, north of Massachusetts, wouldn't that be like Connecticut, Vermont?
no, Connecticut's south of Massachusetts. No. Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine are north of Massachusetts.
Oh, okay, yeah, New Hampshire. Okay, gotcha.
But from what I've seen, the northwestern part of Massachusetts, near the Berkshires, is very hippie-ish. Like it's practically Vermont in a lot of ways. And then the Boston area, you got a lot of universities in that region, so they're going to be more progressive. But the southeastern Massachusetts, outside of Cape Cod, a little whiles outside of Cape Cod, that's pretty conservative. Like that region. One of the counties in that region actually voted against Elizabeth Warren in 2018 and voted for her Trump-supporting opponent. So Massachusetts is not all liberal, despite what a lot of people think.
Yeah, it can be the same way almost anywhere, even on the left coast, as they call it here.
Mm-hmm.
We got California, Oregon, Washington, they're all blue states, right? But there's large swaths of these states that's primarily Republican. Mm-hmm. Like here in Washington State, if you go to eastern, central Washington, even rural areas that are outside of the big cities around here, like my little town here, it's a conservative town. Mm-hmm. So it's just the bigger cities, that are big populace. That's where most of the Democratic votes and Democratic agendas come from.
Mm-hmm. Nancy Pelosi.
Nanpo, she's all right. I don't think she's like the type that I'd probably disagree her on half of her stances, but I think when it comes to the rule of law within our government and upholding the Constitution, she's done a good job doing that. Mm-hmm. I'm glad she called Trump out on all the shit that he was trying to get away with all these years, and she kept on his heels, Mm-hmm. So I think she's a good gatekeeper just for the rule of law on the within our democracy, but sometimes she's a little bit too far left for me. I kind of think her and what's his name from New York, they're always together, right?
Schumer.
What's his name? I'm trying to think of his name right now. Huh?
Schumer?
Yeah, Chuck Schumer. I was going to say I put her and Chuck Schumer kind of in the same category. They're platform liberals. They're not really like my favorite, but I got to respect the work they've done over their career. Mm-hmm. So, they're like decent, they're decent, congressmen and senators. I think overall I would give them like a solid C rating. They're not terrible.
I give Nancy Pelosi a C+.
Yeah, I'd say somewhere around a middle to high C.
Mm-hmm. What would you give Hillary Clinton?
It's hard to judge Hillary since she never actually ran an important office position besides, what was she? She was the something about, wasn't she the something defense secretary when Obama was in office?
Secretary of State.
Or Secretary of State, that's what I meant to say. So, I can judge her on some of her stuff she did during that time, but still, it wasn't all just her decision either. She was just one of the people who unanimously decided what we did throughout the globe. But I don't know. I don't like her as much as Bill, but then again,
I don't think anyone does.
So yeah, I don't like her as much as Bill, but she's a Clinton, so she's not really a progressive either. I think she had too much of a solid, dim platform look to her, and it made her come off as boring, like, yawn. I would just, put her somewhere around a C-.
We match, John. I gave her a C- too.
Yeah, she's never going to be great. She's just like a person that will fill the seat of some minor position within government. You know?
What would you give John Kerry?
John Kerry, I actually kind of have respect for. He seemed to be somebody that cared a lot about just the middle class and grassroots grassroots issues like healthcare, and he seemed to have a pretty good idea of what to do within our foreign policies, although maybe he was a little too war hawkish at times. But I think overall, I kind of like John Kerry. He's he's still a liberal, but he's kind of getting closer. I'd say he's closer towards Blue Dogs than some other liberals are. I don't know. What do you think on that?
Well, what's the letter grade you gave him?
I would give John Kerry probably he's another guy that was never president, but as a senator, I'd say a B-.
Okay, I gave him a D+.
Really?
Yeah, I think John Kerry is kind of, number one, I think that he's a little too wishy-washy. And I think that his foreign policy is kind of, I don't like it that much. And I think he's kind of stiff and boring. But I don't judge that.
He's kind of like Hillary in a way. But
yeah.
See, when I'm thinking about John Kerry, I'm thinking about John Kerry back in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really given him much thought in the last decade, and I know he's still there. He's still doing stuff, but he's one of those guys I just haven't been following closely, so I don't know how good my viewpoint of him is.
I would have voted for him for president, but I wouldn't have done it really, really enthusiastically, but I would have voted for him.
I don't think at this point he's relative.
No.
Back in 2004 when he ran, I wish he would have won, but that was then.
Yeah. I was disappointed when he won neither. And what do you think of last Democrat, Al Gore?
Al Gore, I think he actually would have been better than a lot of people thought.
Yeah.
I think Republicans tried to paint him as some type of far-left extremist, but he really wasn't. He was, when it came to environmentalism, he might have been far-left. But then again, when it comes to my views on environmentalism, I'm kind of far left too. So I kind of match Al Gore there. But on other civics and other cultural aspects of our society, I'm a lot more further right. But I think Al Gore wasn't as far left as Republicans painted him out to be. I think he was kind of a centrist, kind of like Bill Clinton, but maybe he was just further left on certain environmental policies. Maybe he would have done, he might have done more things for our healthcare system if he actually would have gotten to office, to where maybe he would have got on the bandwagon a little quicker on making healthcare affordable. He seemed like one of those guys that cared about certain things that were lacking like that. So I would say that Al Gore he would have been a decent president. I think he would have been a solid B+ if he would have actually became president.
So you give him a B+?
Yeah,
I give him a B. So we're pretty much in the same page. Now we're going to do the Republicans. I don't have as many Republicans, but Mike Pence.
Oh, this will be easy. I'll be like, hate him, like him, hate him. No.
Mike Pence.
I don't like Mike Pence. I don't think he's as bad as Trump, but I would give him a D-.
We match. I gave him a D- too. I have a cousin in Indiana. I've been out there a couple times. Pence is not popular in Indiana at all. He never was, actually. In fact, a lot of people really didn't like him. He won his governor's race. It was a very narrow race, and he did pretty bad for Republican in that race. So.
Yeah, I don't think he cares about working class people, and a lot of people in Indiana are salt of the earth, working class people.
Mm-hmm. It is a very conservative state, though.
They're conservative, but they
not
care about.
But they're not necessarily Bible thumpers.
Yeah. What was that?
I mean,
what was that?
It's not. Everyone thinks Indiana is all Bible thumpers, and that's not the case.
No, it just depends on what part of Indiana.
Yeah.
Maybe in a lot of parts of rural Indiana, but you get closer to Indianapolis and further northeast, there's kind of a more of a broad spectrum of people and their beliefs.
Well, the thing is, northeastern Indiana is pretty conservative. Northwestern Indiana is very, very...
I'm thinking northwestern Indiana, but...
Northwestern Indiana is very liberal. Well, it's gotten more conservative over the years, but it's still Democratic. Because you have Gary and a large African-American population up there.
you get towards the bigger cities like Indianapolis and some of those other bigger cities in Indiana, and you get more of a diverse group of people.
Well, northwestern Indiana is very close to Chicago, so that's another reason why.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Dick Cheney.
Hate him. I would give him an F.
I gave him an F too.
I think he's in the Trump George Bush category.
To some degree, I would agree with that. John McCain.
I love John McCain. For a Republican, I would give him an A, actually. Maybe not compared to Blue Dogs. I mean, if I was going to compare him to Blue Dogs, maybe he'd be more like a C+ or B-. But if I was going to grade him just as a Republican, I'd give him an A.
I agree with that. I gave him a B+ because I think that he put his constituents first. And regardless of how much I agree with him or disagree with him, and I agree with him on quite a bit, and I disagree with him on quite a bit too. But I think that he was one of a kind, so I give him a B+.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney.
Huh?
Mitt Romney.
Mitt Romney, he's still kind of a platform conservative that goes by, survival of the fittest when it comes to companies and giving rich people and corporations huge bailouts. Mm-hmm. Not a big fan of his economic policies, but he has said a few things throughout the course of his senator life that I didn't disagree with, like the whole idea of a flat tax. I'm not totally against, because at least the rich would be taxed the poor, the same as the poor. I don't know if flat tax would be the best policy out of all the tax plans we could have, but I didn't hate that idea. I think Mitt Romney's the voice of reason when it comes to many cultural clashes within our society. Mm-hmm. I don't think he does anything too extreme, like he wouldn't pit races against each other or lie to the public about his opponents, kind of like how Trump just says outlandish things that aren't even true about people. Mitt Romney pretty much will say things the way he sees them. It might be through a GOP lens, but he tries to be honest. If I'm grading him as a Republican, I'd probably give him a C. But if I was grading him against other Democrats, he'd be more like maybe a D+.
I gave him a C, so.
A C?
Yeah, I gave him a C.
Yeah, I'd say it's fair that as a Republican, he would be a solid C.
Yep.
It's not terrible.
Susan Collins.
Susan Collins, she's definitely like a true centrist. I feel like centrist Republicans are right on the right of Blue Dogism, so they're kind of like our allies in a way, even though we might vote differently about certain things. I'd give her an A+ as a Democrat. That's a strong. I mean, as a Republican, I meant to say. I give her an A+. Because she has actually voted on some Democrat bills the opposite of other Republicans. When it came to the impeachment, she voted for impeaching Trump. I thought that was pretty noble of her. So I'd give her, I'd say at least a solid A, if not an A+ as a Republican, because she's nonpartisan on certain issues, and I think that's important.
I gave her a C+ because I think that she's bipartisan, but I also think that sometimes she plays the voters and will pretend that she's undecided when we all know she's been pressured by Mitch McConnell.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
George H.W. Bush.
Oh, yeah, the Bush one. He was pretty bad. I wouldn't say he was as bad as his son, but he still did a lot of harm towards busting up unions and pretty much giving corporations more power than ever before and more tax breaks and creating foreign wars that were unnecessary. So he was pretty similar to his son. He just had, I think he just maybe had barely a little bit better leadership qualities than his son, but I would still put him at like a D-.
Mm-hmm. I gave him a C-, so. Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham is a treasonous betrayer, and he doesn't care about the Constitution. I give him an F.
I give an F, too. And lastly, Tim Scott.
I'm trying to think. Oh, Tim Scott, the kind of conservative blue dog from Ohio, right?
No, that's Tim Ryan. Tim Scott's the black Republican from South Carolina.
Oh, him. I don't really like him too much, man. Like, I feel like he's just a yes man to like far rightism. I feel like he definitely prefers partisanship and creating divisiveness. He's not as far as like Trump and some of those guys like Steve Miller and I mean all of Trump's like Legion of Doom type staff, you know, that were just like pretty much pure evil. He's not quite that far right, but he's still definitely like somebody that prefers partisanship and kind of like I almost feel like he's like a black Ted Cruz in a way.
I think he's more liberal than Ted Cruz, though. Maybe just by a little bit. I think
maybe, but like overall, I don't like. I would still put him at maybe somewhere between an F plus and a D minus. Like he's like maybe tolerable in some ways, but very dislikable still.
I gave him a D plus.
A D plus?
Yep.
That was nice.
So we only have a few minutes left. I just want to get your perspective because we said we were going to talk about this. Progressives, defunding and abolishing the police, abolishing ICE, open borders, higher taxes, ending Israel, endless government spending, cancel culture, unruly riots, anti-capitalism, letting prisoners vote, no deportations, balloon deficits, limited societal structure, legalization of all drugs, safe injection sites, packing the Supreme Court, identity politics, abolishment of the Second Amendment. Do you agree with all these things, and what do you think America would look like with all these policies in place?
I think it's pretty gross, to tell you the truth, Evan. I can't say I stand for any of those things. And all you got to do is look at cities that have become increasingly progressive. If you want to look at the future of America under their policy, look at Chicago and the riots in Chicago last summer. And how many business storefronts were destroyed? How many? I don't know. I noticed that they kept a lot of things under like hushed up when it came to Chicago or even Minneapolis on the amount of people that were injured or hurt during these riots. But I'm sure there's a lot more, fallout, including injuries and casualties that people want to report on the news because they don't want to make it look as bad as it did. Mm-hmm. You got increasingly rampant homelessness, but yet property prices and taxes just keep going up in those areas. I mean, I could use Seattle as an example. I always do because, it's a typical progressive hub, right? Seattle was like one of the most gorgeous cities probably on the West Coast, maybe even 15 years ago. I went and visited it in 2008 when I was like 23 or 24. I think I was 23. That was when I was dating my wife, and I took her on a week trip up to Seattle. And at the time, it was still a beautiful city. There wasn't a lot of trash. It seemed like there was still kind of law and order. Maybe there was a few crazies walking around like there would be in any city, but it seemed like a city that had a decent amount of order and law. The last 2 times I've been there, there's trash stacked up sometimes 8 or 9 feet high. There's sometimes you'll hear on the news about transients attacking people or biting people. Pretty much cops can like actually get charged if they arrest somebody for being disorderly, unless there's been maybe like serious injuries, then they can arrest. But it's getting to where cops' hands are tied so bad in those cities that there's really no policing going on. It's almost like total lawlessness. And I just don't agree with there has to be law and order. There has to be consequences to people's actions. If you steal something, I think you should go to jail. If you deface property, I think you should face jail time, I mean, there can be rehabilitation afterwards, but either way, you should face jail time and have to pay fines, and there should be consequences to your actions if you're acting disorderly. And I think that's quickly getting out of hand, where I think people don't feel safe in progressive cities. Mm-hmm. On top of that, with open borders policies, I think that's totally harmful towards the working class in this country. And it just also lets a lot of people in that are not really properly screened when you just have quick pass citizenship rights without really thoroughly investigating the people you're letting in, or just kind of letting them in large groups. You don't know who you're letting in. You know, there's people that could belong to gangs from, you know, other countries, or maybe just be cartel members that are getting through and getting citizenship and establishing bases over here. But that's not even the biggest issue. The biggest issue is that when you keep getting mass amounts of people being imported without having a decent amount of security and just kind of letting it be a porous border, then you're going to have a lot more you know, areas that have poverty, because not all those people are going to be able to get lifted up. So the poverty problem increases, and also you're creating lower wages in areas because they have more cheap labor available, so they're not going to raise up their standard of living for working class people, you know. So it just helps increase corporatism's power. So that's why I say that the progressive wing are really, I look at them as establishment corporatists in a way, and they're pretending like that they're grassroots people that care about the American people, but really they're feeding corporations more swiftly than even the Republicans, I feel.
Next, the Trumpian Republicans. Wacko conspiracy theories, discriminatory policies against LGBT people, limited access to healthcare, balloon deficits, tax cuts which mainly help large corporations and high earners, rigging the Supreme Court, Jewish space lasers, insurrections, closed borders, abortion bans, even in cases of rape, Social Security and Medicaid cuts, assault weapons in the hands of civilians, nationalism. What do you think?
I think it's a recipe for a lot of violence in this country. You saw how much divisiveness happened during Trump's administration, and you pretty much had like far right-wing groups like the Proud Boys and some neo-Nazi groups like attacking other protesters, you know, and like with weapons and stuff. So you saw radicalization on the right. I just feel it's going to breed violence. You're going to see hate crimes increase like they have been. Not just that, but it seems like far-right agenda when it comes to business always creates more poverty. And when you have more poverty because you're not fighting for workers' rights or unions, and you're just trying to help, help the rich get richer and give them tax breaks and come down harder on everybody else, and only offering minimum wage or low wage jobs, you're going to increase crime. So, I mean, even though progressives are kind of like the champions of allowing all crime to be illegal, Republicans generate crime through poverty and through apartheid.
Right. All right. Well, John Hensel, thank you so much for joining me.
Yep, it was a pleasure. Hopefully I didn't talk too much. That's just how I am. I try to think while I'm talking, and then I try to describe everything I believe, but sometimes it's a lot to cover.
Right. Well, these are very complicated issues, and I'm glad you joined me. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening to the Blue Dog Whisperer, everyone.
Yep. You're welcome, Evan.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Yep.